name is Doug, and I don't have a name tag on. I apologize. I was out of this room just long enough to use the restroom before the service, and so I did not take the time to go over to David Mary and get the name tag on, so I apologize for that, but it's a joy to be able to be with you this morning. If this is your first time here at Risen King Bible Church, we welcome you, and hopefully this is not your only time with us, that you have opportunity to be able to meet with God here, meet with God's people, and to be able to be encouraged in your walk with the Lord, to be challenged in the truths of Scripture, but also to find friends and neighbors, family members of the body that can come alongside you, pray with you, support you, encourage you in the ups and downs of life. We're in John chapter 2 this week. We've finally made it through the first chapter of John, and what we are doing is we're working through all of John's writings. We wanted to launch our gathering together as Risen King Bible Church. We've only been around since January 5th, so this is Sunday number 6 that Risen King Bible Church has even existed, and we wanted to start off with looking at who Jesus is and to learn of Jesus through the writings of John. Now, if you're familiar with your Bibles in the New Testament, there's a number of books that have his name in it, and he wrote all of them. So the Gospel of John, so we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. He wrote that. But then we also have 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. He wrote those. And then there's one book that he wrote that doesn't have his name on it, and it's the book of the Revelation. That's the last book of the Bible, of the New Testament. And so we are going to work through John's writings as somebody who was a witness of what Christ did. He was one of his disciples. He walked the earth with Jesus. And he gives a testimony to what he observed and what he saw. And the aim is that we would know that Jesus Christ was God in the flesh, and he is the one who restores us to our Heavenly Father. And so we get to go through almost the entire narrative of the Bible just through his writings, because John 1 started with in the beginning, just like Genesis does. And then we get to end with God reigning on the throne. Now, as a church, as we go through these things, I'd like to provide slides for you. Some of you have said that you really enjoy them, which is great. And so I'm going to have this connect. You want to go to the next one? Maybe this isn't going to work, and we may have to do an old school PowerPoint every time that you are going to progress the slides. All right, that's fun. I have 2 of these in my bag. I may grab the other one. But as we go through this, if you want to, in my backpack, just bring that up to me. As we look through these things, we are going to, this Gospel of John is broken up into, we have a prologue at the very beginning. That's the first, just hold the backpack. Yeah, thank you. We have the prologue, which is the first 18 verses, thank you, of the book. And then we have, after that, we have this, it's called the Book of Signs. And the Book of Signs is this collection of the verses, chapter 1, verse 18, verse 19, through the end of chapter 12, going through the Book of Signs. And this one isn't connecting either. So we're going to go to the next one. You laugh? I'm serious. I am a national presenter and speaker, and the reason why you travel with 4 presentation remotes is because this happens from time to time. So what I'm going to need for you to do is come back up here, because you have to plug something in. This, and the case that you had, did you leave it up here? In there is the adapter for USB to USB USB-C. It's above. So, we are familiar with signs. The Book of Signs is really, what John is wanting to do with this is he's trying to give a testimony to Jesus is who he claimed to be, and we're going to show over and over and over and over again that he is who he said he was. And so in the middle of all of that are these signs. And so there's 8 signs that he's going to go through. But we're going to go through just a quick little quiz to kind of get our minds wrapped around what certain signs indicate. So everybody, what does this sign tell us to do? Stop. All right, what about this one? Slow down. It goes slow down. What does this sign mean? Yeah, go see a chiropractor. Your spine's out of alignment. What's this one? No U-turns. You're near a mall. Exactly. What's this one? Yes, slippery roads, right?
John Deere.
Yes, but it means that I actually heard there's a radio interview that was done, and a woman called into this radio program because she said, I don't know why they put the deer crossing signs in high traffic areas. They should put it in places where less people drive so people wouldn't hit them. Thinking like the deer went and found the signs and that's where they were allowed to cross. Like a deer crosswalk. Like it took like about 3 minutes into this, like, it seems like you think that this is, and it was just one of those great realities. No, this just means there's deer in the area, be watchful. What about this? Hospital. There's a hospital nearby. Yes, radioactive, there's biohazard, right? Anybody ever know what these mean? No. I actually looked it up. I almost put the guide on there. But it's all about the different levels. 4 is really bad, like you're going to die on all of the different categories that it tests, all right? And so white, the W at the bottom one means you can't mix whatever it is with water because it'll react in a negative way. But so the red is 0, so that area is not bad, but 3 is probably not going to do well if you interact with it. So, what about this one? You'd like to think this is for pregnant moms, but this is for fat men who want to buy grills. Yeah, it's in front of all those, right? No, but we have all of these different signs that are out here, and when we see them, when we know what it means, it can be helpful. It can direct us in a certain way. All of these signs that we've shown this morning, we have a general understanding of what they indicate, and we all are going to follow along with them, and so then there's order. They either give instruction or they give direction. They give awareness. If you need to know where a hospital is, you need to know these different things. These signs indicate those things. And what we find here in John chapter 2 is the first of 8 unique and significant signs that we are going to see throughout John's writing. Now, the first 7 of them are in the first 12 chapters. That 8th one we'll see in just a second. As we look at this, we're finally getting into this book of signs. We've got this understanding that we have the prologue, then we have John the Baptist, kind of that transition from John the Baptist to John, the author, using John the Baptist to direct our hearts and mind to Jesus. And the rest of the story is all about Jesus as the eternal Son of God who came to redeem mankind. And so within the Gospel of John, we have these 8 signs. And obviously, we're not going to hit all of them today. We're going to hit all of them over the next few months. But to kind of let you have an overview, an understanding of where things are going to be going, there's these 8 unique signs that John wants to put in there that each one of them is saying, this is Jesus, the Son of God. No one else could do all these things. So he's putting together this argument of he was the Word made flesh, and he dwelt among us, we beheld his glory. Again, the Gospel of John, if you weren't here early on, the Gospel of John was written in the maybe 80s or 90s AD. So Jesus had already ascended into heaven maybe 60 years prior to the writing of this Gospel. And so when there's those statements of we beheld his glory, it's because we did. 60 years ago, we did. He's no longer around us. But we beheld his glory. The glory is the only one of the Father, full of grace and truth. And so each of these signs we have... the one we're going to study today, Jesus turns water to wine. Next, another sign that we're going to see is him healing of the royal official's son. Next, we're going to see healing of the paralytic at Bethesda. And then we're going to, or Bethesda, sorry. And then we're going to see him feed the multitudes. We're going to see him walk on water. We're going to see him heal a blind man. And we're going to see him raise Lazarus from the dead. Now, like, that's only 7. You said 8. Exactly. We have an 8th one that is going to happen not during this book of signs, but it's in the second half of the book, which really smart people call the book of glory, whereas John has established his argument that this is Jesus. There's no doubt about it. He's able to raise people from the dead, heal people blind from birth, turn water to wine, walk on water, like all of these things that only a God could do, he did. And then once we get into chapter 13, then the rest of John's telling of the gospel is Jesus now turning toward the cross. And for his glory then to ultimately be put on display. So, the Old Testament and the New Testament also, they each have a word that is translated for sign, and they actually have multiple words that translate into signs or miracles. But the correlating Hebrew term, that's the Greek term in our New Testament, is hot, all right? And it means a token, a mark, miracle. And it's most often used as wonderful acts of God that show his power, his character, and faithfulness. I'd like for you to turn to Exodus chapter 3. We're going to look and see how this word is demonstrated, because I think it's going to give us a good understanding as to even some of the things that John is trying to communicate through his gospel. So in Exodus chapter 3, I'll get there in a second. In Exodus chapter 3, we have this story of the burning bush. And interestingly enough, the burning bush is not used as a sign. Even though this would be one of those great indicators, like, okay, God met with his people, yes. But that's not where the word sign is. But I wanted us to be in Exodus chapter 3 to see this is the context of where this word is going to be used in chapter 4. God has brought Moses out to the wilderness, and he is speaking through. Moses looks and he sees this bush that is on fire but not being consumed, and he walks up to it and all of a sudden starts speaking to him, which I don't know how many times you have burning bushes speak to you. This would be very odd. But he's told, take off your sandals on holy ground. And we get into then chapter 4. In chapter 4, and in verses 8 and 9, well, I'll start in verse 7. Verse 8 and 9 we go. And if they will not believe you, because God is now calling Moses to go and to tell the Pharaoh that the Israelites need to be released, because they're under bondage in Egypt. And so he's going to go and he's going to present to them, and he says, well, what am I going to do? And God's like, what's on your hands? Like the staff, throw on the ground. It's a snake. All right, pick it up. So he picks it up. And all of these things, and we finally get to verse 8. He's learned a couple of unique things that God's going to do with him. And he says, if they will not believe you, God said, or listen to the first sign, they may believe the latter sign. So the first sign is turning a stick into a snake and picking it up, and it turns into a stick again. The second is putting his hand under his cloak. It comes out. It's got like leprosy all over it. Puts it back in. It comes back out, and it's clean. And so these are supposed to be signs. These are supposed to be indicators that Moses is representing and speaking on behalf of God. Interestingly, though, when we get to Exodus chapter 7, if you want to turn just a couple of pages over to Exodus chapter 7, Moses and Aaron finally get in front of Pharaoh. And in chapter 7 it says, and the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I command you, and your brother Aaron shall tell Pharaoh to let the people of Israel go out of his land. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt, Pharaoh will not listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt and bring my hosts, my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great acts of judgment. What are these signs that God is telling that he's going to do through Moses? There's like this many of them. You want to give a guess? Okay, there's 10, but 10 what? What do we see in the book of Exodus as we're getting ready to do this? Yeah, go ahead, guys.
10 signs.
There's 10 signs, but what were they?
Plagues.
The plagues, right? Absolutely. Those under 13 are crushing you adults, and just letting you know. All right? So we have these 10 plagues, these 10 signs that God uses to show Pharaoh that he is with Moses and he is going to bring his people out. And we know over and over and over again that God hardens Pharaoh's heart. And they get to the point now where it's like, okay, what are we going to do? Well, we get to this 10th sign. And if you turn to Exodus chapter 12, verse 13, will be the key verse. But we're going to look at chapter 12, we have this Passover. So, in fact, a third, just a fun little thought, a third of the occurrences in the Old Testament for this word sign, a third of the occurrences happened during this Exodus event. So it's used a number of times, but a third of them are all used in kind of describing, okay, with the sign of picking up the snake, with the boils of leprosy on his hand, all those things. The 10 plagues were all these signs. And we see that finally this 10th plague is, we have the Passover, where God instructs the people of Israel to take a lamb and to take its blood and put it around the doorposts of their house, and the angel of death is going to come over them. And if he doesn't see the blood on the doorpost, then the firstborn of that household was not going to live through the night. And that seems like a horrendous thing. But they were given every opportunity to respond to the Lord and to do what he had instructed them to do. But what ended up being is this blood on the doorpost ended up being a sign to the angel of death and was going to spare God's people from having their firstborn son dying in the night. We then jump to Joshua chapter 4, and we'll see another time where we see some signs. And so with Moses and Aaron, these signs were to represent, to demonstrate God's power in front of his people and in front of Pharaoh, to say, we can do all these things. We can bring frogs, we can bring hail, we can bring all of these different things, turn the river and the Nile into blood, and all these things are going on. We have all this, and then we get to Joshua. Joshua chapter 4, we finally, and through the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, we see from creation all the way through the people of Israel going through the Exodus. They finally make it out of Egypt. God brings them out to the wilderness, brings them to the Mount Sinai, gives him his 10 words, the 10 commandments. Then they see the promised land. They're afraid because there's huge people there. Then the whole generation, because they didn't trust God to preserve them, God waited for them to all die off, and then he brought in the next generation of people into the promised land. And so they're finally going across the Jordan River, and we see here in Joshua chapter 4, when all the nation had finished passing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, take 12 men from the people, from each tribe of man, and command them, saying, take 12 stones from here out of the midst of the Jordan, for the very place where the priest's feet stood firmly, and bring them over with you, and lay them down in a place where you lodge tonight. Then Joshua called the 12 men from the people of Israel, whom he had appointed, and a man from each tribe. And Joshua said to them, pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and take up each of you a stone upon his shoulder, according to the number of tribes of the people of Israel, that this may be a sign among you. When your children ask in time to come, what do those stones mean to you? Then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the people of Israel a memorial forever. So we have this sign then being kind of a designation, a memorial of what God did. So not only were signs being used to say, I am a messenger of God, but also to point us and to remind us of who God is. In fact, when we gather together as a body on the first Sunday of each month, we have a cup and bread acting as signs of what God had done for us, his body broken for us and his blood shed for us. So we still have these signs today. So in the Old Testament, this is where we see this, but then on the other side of things, with the New Testament, we have another word that's very similar, and it's an indicator or a miracle, most often used to describe extraordinary events performed by divine figures and their agents. The reason why we say by divine figures and their agents, because not every time are these signs actually things that God did. And we'll see that in just a second. A very common sign of use of this word is in Luke chapter 2. And this shall be a sign unto you. You shall find a babe wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. That was the sign that they had found the Messiah. So the shepherds, when Jesus was born, and the angels are there saying, Hosanna, glory to God in the highest, and say, this shall be the sign to you. You shall find a baby wrapped in swaddling cloths lying in a manger. In Matthew chapter 26, verse 48, we have another use of this word sign. And this sign is a sign that Judas uses to select who is the one that the people that are finding Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, the sign will be the one on whose face I kiss. That's the one that they were supposed to go after. And so that was a sign and demonstration of what was going on. So we have a variety of different ways this is used, but in our use of, in our following through John, the rest of the gospel, this first part of the Gospel of John, we see this sign being used over and over again. So, let's get into our text then. With all of that background as to where we are in John's telling of the gospel, we now get to John chapter 2, verse 1. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. And when the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. And Jesus said to her, woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. His mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Now there are 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. And they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, now, draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water, it had now become wine, and did not know where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you've kept the good wine until now. This is the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days. We have in this setting Jesus he's going to a town of Cana. Okay, so this is Cana up here. It's about, depending on where, because there's a number of archaeological sites that people that study these things think that where the ancient city or town of Cana was. And so because there's differing opinions of where it is, it's anywhere between like 4 and 9 miles north of Nazareth. And what do we know unique about Nazareth? That was his hometown, right? That's Jesus' hometown, is Nazareth. And so we're kind of in the area that Jesus would hang out. Like the distance from here, from Nazareth to Cana is basically about the distance from here to Calico Jacks on Manasota Key. If you've ever had dinner there, if you were to walk straight to the beach, that's about 4.3 miles. It's about the distance on the short end of how far it was. So it wasn't a terribly far distance. But Nazareth, some believe that Nazareth as a town had only 40 to 50 families living in it total. Maybe 400 people. Some believe that there may have been upwards of just over 1,000 people in Nazareth. So it's not a huge town. And Cana was a suburb of Nazareth. Was another town even farther out. So there's not a lot of people in these towns. And so it's likely that everybody, how many of you have ever lived in a small town, like under 5,000 people? All right, when you're in a town of under 5,000 people, basically everybody's in each other's business. And most of them are related to each other somehow through marriage, because that's just how those towns go. There's not a lot of options. And so it was very probable that many of the people that were at this wedding were connected to Jesus either through as friendship or as extended family members. And so it's no wonder that he was invited to this wedding in Cana, because it was likely that the whole community was invited. Just like open house season, everybody shows up to everybody else's graduation open house. The same would be true for weddings. We all live life together. It's a big, huge feast. And in fact, many times the celebration would go a week long. That's some kind of party. And so we get to this, and again, if it goes a week long, then that means there's going to be a lot of food and beverages consumed, especially if the whole town is there. And one of the great fears would be not to be able to provide enough food and beverages for all of your guests. How many of you, when you have people over to the house, you always over-prepare? When it comes to, like, you're going to make a bunch of food for everyone. Like, I mean, it's Super Bowl Sunday. Some of us are going to be snacking on Super Bowl snacks next Thursday. It's just how it's going to be. We're going to put them in the freezer. We're going to warm them up and have whatever. If it's going to be the jalapeno poppers wrapped in bacon and all these other different things. I had a whole bunch of different. We would do pork shots, which would make almost like a shot glass out of salami and bacon, and then pipe cream cheese into it, and it just was one bite little things. So good.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to Super Bowl Sunday, you can't tell. All right? It's the best time for food. But it's the worst thing in the world to consider. Wait a second, we're running low. Hey, like, what do we have in the cupboards? Where the neighbors at? Hey, do you guys have anything? And Mary comes to Jesus, we're out of wine. And it's possible that Mary had, because of the town they were in, it's possible Mary may have had some official responsibility for all of this. Now, it would have ultimately been the bridegroom's responsibility to provide for all of it, but maybe the bridegroom had said, hey, Mary, can you help handle some things during the party? And she goes to Jesus, we're out of wine. And Jesus responds, what does that have to do with me? My time has not arrived yet. What do you want me to do? And we don't know when Joseph passed away, but we don't have much recording of Joseph after he and Mary are looking for Jesus in the temple. And so it is likely that by now Joseph has already passed away. We have only one other recording that we'll see where people say, isn't this Mary and Joseph's son, the one that we know? Like, the guy fixed our bed frame the other day. You know, he's a carpenter. At some point, Joseph passes away, and so Jesus would have been, as Mary's firstborn, would have been the primary person to care for Mary, and probably the person that Mary depended on more than anybody else in the world. And so when there's a problem, it's, hey, Jesus, we need to figure this out together. So, as we get into this text, we see this, that Jesus calls his mother woman. Now, in our current context, if you say, stop bothering me, woman, that's probably not a term of endearment. And if it's said to you, it is probably not going to be reciprocated with anything for you, sweetheart. And rightly so. But this isn't necessarily a derogatory kind of rude, now it's direct, but it's not intended to be rude. It's like, ma'am, in this context. Ma'am, what is it that you want me to do? How does this have to deal with me? And scholars will go back and forth and saying, okay, did Mary know that Jesus was possibly able to do something about this, like miraculously? Is it's so like, hey, and she's like, it's not time yet. It could have been just, Mary, Jesus, you need to help me. But the tone here, again, is not rude. It's very abrupt. And it was a common way for this question to be posed in this culture. In fact, we see it multiple times in Scripture. This is a Jewish or Semitic idiom that always distances the two parties. So when we see this, and the Greek is really weird. It says like, what to me and to you. If you literally translate it, it's what to me and to you. It doesn't translate very cleanly. And so people translate, try to massage it out and work it out, and they kind of come down to this conclusion of, what have you to do with me? And we look at this, and if you want to turn, we'll turn to two of these. Let's do the ones in Mark. So Mark chapter 1, verse 24. want to turn there, you can. And all of these examples that I'm going to show you are Jesus is interacting with a certain type of being. So in Mark chapter 1, verse 24, this is, Mark is recounting Jesus healing the man with an unclean spirit. And all of a sudden, this man cries out in front of Jesus and the entire synagogue, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." So the demons that are inside this man say, "What do you have to do with us?" Look at the next recording of this in Mark. Chapter 5, verse 7, just a couple pages over. And again, each one of these accounts are the same kind of a scenario with the same grouping of beings, of demons that are saying, "What does this have to do with?" Chapter 5, verse 7. I don't think that's... Yes, it is. It's farther down. So, and crying out with a loud voice. Again, this is Jesus healing another man with a demon. Verse 7, and crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." So there's a unique distancing of these demons saying, "What are you?" And then they all would ascribe to him true titles of him. Even the demons acknowledge who Jesus was. They're like, "What are you going to do to us? What business do you have that is going to impact us?" And Jesus, in this setting, in John chapter 2, is saying to his mom, "What does this issue of lacking wine have anything correlating to me in my character, my person, or my purpose? Like, this is not what I was called to care for." But, and the moms in the room, it's interesting when he says, "My time has not yet come." We have a mother who is trying to have her son come along and help, and all of a sudden there's this distancing. "Ma'am, I don't know what you want with me." And we'll see that Mary's response after this is to tell all the other servants, "Do whatever he says." She's acknowledged that my relationship with my son has shifted. And this happens with all parents when their kids grow and get out of the house. But this was a unique distancing that Jesus is now saying, I've lived these first 30 years, I've been with you, I've cared for all of your needs, I've done these things, but the reason why I came to earth was not primarily to be your son. The reason I came to earth was because I'm the Son of God to take away the sins of the world. And now it's time to begin walking through this way. So, my time has not yet come. We see this often. Jesus using this phrase, and John recording Jesus saying this, "My time has not yet come. My time has not yet come. My time has not yet come." All throughout all of this first few sections of John chapter 7, verse 30, chapter 8, verse 20, chapter 12, verse 23, verse 27. My time has not yet come. And then we see the shift. Again, we get to this book of glory, we see the shift. We're now in chapter 13, verse 1, chapter 17, verse 1, Jesus now saying, "My time has now come. It is now the hour that I'm to give my life for the earth, for the world." So, Mary's response, "Okay, I get this, but do whatever he says." In the Old Testament, what's interesting, the prophets would speak of the Messianic age as a time when wine would flow liberally. Over and over again, we see in the Old Testament that when they're talking about under the Messianic kingdom and reign, your bellies will be filled, wine will flow continually. We'll have everything that you need in the Messianic kingdom. When the Messiah comes and establishes his reign, there will be plenty of everything, not just a little bit, but grace upon grace upon grace, as John had already written in chapter 1. And so we see multiple times that he is speaking that wine would flow liberally. In fact, in John chapter 3, we'll get that in a couple of weeks, John the Baptist declares that Jesus is the Messianic bridegroom. He says, "Okay, I was the guest, but now the bridegroom has arrived, and so he must increase and I must decrease." And that's really the last that we really hear about John. in this, John the Baptist in this gospel. Because Jesus, the bridegroom, the groom, has shown up, and it's now time for him to take the center stage. And as such, as the Messianic bridegroom, he will supply all of the wine that is needed for the Messianic banquet. We see this in the book of, at the end of Revelation. We have this marriage feast of the Lamb. In a time still to come where God is going to gather people, there's going to be this marriage supper of the Lamb. And Jesus, as the ultimate bridegroom, is going to provide a feast for all who gather, where the wine will not run dry and the food will not disappear. But that hour has not yet come. So, Mary understands. She kind of transfers from mother to follower in this unique scene. We don't hear of Mary again until she's at the foot of the cross. And Jesus says to John, the author of this gospel, John, behold your mother. Woman, behold your son. Again, Jesus says that as the firstborn of Mary was responsible for caring for her, and now that it's time for him to die and to go, he passes on the baton of care for mom to John the apostle. That's the only other time that we hear of Mary. But in this moment, she is rebuked, kindly, but rebuked for presuming upon the family tie. In fact, there's other times when Jesus is talking like, hey, Jesus, your mom and your siblings are showing up, like, who is my mother? Who are my brothers? The person who does my will and does the will of my Father who sent me is my mother and brother and sister and father. Like, that's my family, the ones who do the will of the Lord. And so we have this unique shifting with Jesus, and what uniquely with Mary is she displays faith that is perfectly content to leave the matter in Jesus' hands. All right, I trust you. And then says to the servants, whatever he says, do it. So then what ends up happening? So in our text we have this happens, and Jesus then turns water into wine. And he goes, okay, I'll take care of this for you. And there were big jars that are made of stone. The reason why that's important is because a lot of the clay jars would have left sediment in them. And these were purification jars. This was the water that you would have taken to wash your hands and wash your feet before entering in. And so he didn't want that to be really dirty. So these are huge jars that hold 20 to 30 gallons made of stone. And Jesus says, fill it with water. Now, I don't know if you've ever carried something that would be large enough to carry. I mean, just carrying 20 gallons of water on its own is enough. But then you're carrying it into a container that is made out of stone. But he's like, okay, so they go and they fill all of these things all the way up to the brim. So it's not as though Jesus could have taken all the other leftover, maybe the bad wine or some of the stuff that was sitting at the bottom and kind of poured it into the water. And so it was water that kind of tasted like wine. No, this was a complete miracle where God changed the composition from water to wine. And it was real wine. There's people that maybe you grew up in a very dry teetotaler. You never touched alcohol because it's always sin, always. Jesus turned this into real wine. Just kind of put that forward to you. This wasn't grape juice. We can't just kind of skirt around and say, no, maybe it was weaker. They would combine wine with water to make it not as strong as what we did. Well, they still were able to be merry at this wedding. They were still enjoying it to the point where the master of ceremonies was like, why did we wait until now to bring out the best wine? Like, everybody's kind of unable to taste things clearly right now. They've had their fill over these last few days. They wouldn't even know the difference. Why did you wait till now to put the best stuff in there? Only to show God's miraculous power. But what ends up happening at the end of this? What ends up happening at the end of this is, in verse 11, this is the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested or put on display his glory. God's glory was manifested. God's glory was put on display. And look at what happened at the end. What are the last few words of verse 11, that last sentence? And his disciples believed in him. What's the purpose of John writing this gospel again? What does John chapter 20, verse 31 say? But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you might have life in his name. This entire gospel is so that we would believe. So from the very beginning, we have this first miracle, and John wants to make certain that the reader hears that the disciples marveled and they manifested his glory, and they believed in him. And I think that there are times as current day Americans that we will see the glory of God on display through miraculous things. Maybe even the normal things of giving us today our daily bread. We still go before our Heavenly Father and we petition to him and pray, not our will but yours be done, but Lord, would you please intervene in this situation? Would you heal our son or our daughter? Would you bring wholeness to our friend? Would you, whatever the case may be, we would go before the Lord and we see him answer these prayers like he has manifested his glory in this, and it only bolsters our belief. In those times where there seems to be despair in our world, God will bring somebody into our life to pray with us, to read with us, to cry with us, to listen to us, whatever the case may be. And it's like, God, you are so good, and it again affirms and confirms our belief that he hasn't left us. He is near to us. And as we think through this, when we see we've manifested his glory is on display, he has revealed himself to us, our response then is belief and worship. So we'll wrap up this morning in 1 Corinthians. We ask this question: what signs are we looking for? In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, we have this text here where Paul is writing to this church in Corinth, which is a Roman city under Roman rule. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, we have this section where I'm going to read verses 18 all the way through 31. It's a longer section, but we're going to read through this. And I want you to see the role that signs play in this and how God even uses those things in drawing people to himself. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, beginning in verse 18. For the word of the cross, this message that Jesus died and rose again, is folly or foolishness to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For those of us who are trying to be so intellectual and to have all these conversations, and can God not just kind of put us in our place? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. It doesn't make sense, especially in America, to say, you know what? The greatest power you have is your powerlessness and dependence on Christ. In your weakness is when you are strong. That doesn't make any sense. That's folly. Why would that make any sense to anybody? Yeah, to the unbeliever it is, but for those of us who have seen the power of God in our lives, we know that it is there. So it's not foolishness to us. We've experienced it. We beheld his glory. For since the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. Verse 22, for Jews demand signs. This is what John is saying throughout his gospel. It was primarily written to Jewish people and then the Gentiles in the area that some had converted to Judaism, but then also some of the Jewish people who had converted to Christianity within those first 60 years of the church. So he's writing to this mixed group of people, and Jews demand signs. And that's what ultimately, all the time throughout the gospel, they were asking, show us a sign, show us a sign, show us a sign. And that was supposed to demonstrate that he was the Messiah. And he kept showing them signs, and they eventually crucified him. But the Jews demand signs, and Greeks seek wisdom. Again, that would have been when we look at Athens, and we look at the areas where they're always seeking after knowledge, and they would pontificate about all these amazing ideas, and that was kind of like the place where all of the original thoughts and excellent thoughts were kind of fostered, was in this area in Athens. And so Jews demand signs, Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, which is a stumbling block to the Jews because they're the ones that crucified him. And folly to the Gentiles because it doesn't make any sense that we would be dependent upon somebody else for our salvation. We want to work it out ourselves. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. So, consider our calling. Not many of us are wise according to worldly standards. Not many are powerful. Not many of noble birth. Like, on our own, we're not all that awesome. Nothing of note. But, that doesn't matter. Because God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. And because of him, you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption. So, as it is written, one who boasts, boast in the Lord. And honestly, those of us who are weak, those of us who are low, those of us who are without noble birth, the fact that God can do and chooses to do anything in and through us is a sign to others that God can take anything and use it for his glory. And so be encouraged, brothers and sisters, that as we consider how God might be calling us, how God might be using us, how God may be wanting to demonstrate things to us, we ask the question, what signs are you looking for? How are you expecting to see God show up and to work in your life? Or are you waiting for him to do whatever it is that you're asking? If he doesn't, then you're doubting that he even hears. What understanding are you seeking to gain? There are going to be some questions that we are left unanswered. And so if we're seeking after signs okay, Lord, if you do this, then I know that you're real. If you do this, I know that you're real. If you do this, and we're constantly looking for signs and not resting in who God is, who he said he was. Or we're thinking, okay, if I have just this greater clarity in this and the other thing, and if I have greater understanding, then this will finally make sense. The miracle at Cana is an invitation to recognize that the glory of Christ is on display. And for us to respond in faith, to respond in obedience, to trust in his ability to care for all things. Christ has shown us through his word, and we are called to receive him with faith. So, let's then respond to Christ's glory with a life of trust, obedience, knowing that God will fulfill all of his promises. God is the one who transforms our lives. The wedding at Cana reminds us that Jesus, as the chief bridegroom, has come to bring his people into a relationship with himself, which is why, as the church, we are called the bride of Christ. So as we consider today this unique first sign, we ask the question, do you believe? That was the disciples' response. We saw him do this miraculous thing. His glory was on display, and they believed in him. If you're invited here today by a friend, hopefully you have seen the glory of God on display in their life, and you believe that their faith is genuine and real, and that's why you want to participate with them in their walk with the Lord. Maybe this is a time where we consider, okay, am I truly trusting? Am I like the Jews demanding a sign to then validate that he's worthy of being trustworthy? Or are we act like the Gentiles demanding that we have to have all of our questions answered before we can believe? Or do we realize that the grave is empty? There was a dead man who rose again, never to die again, and he has offered restoration to him through his shed blood on our behalf. The one who can turn water to wine, and as we see, will raise the dead and a variety of other different things. He is to be trusted. He is to be glorified. He is our Savior.